In the relatively small category of 3D platformers released between the years of 1996 and 2000, Croc is a game that doesn't really come up in conversation. Most of the time you'll get a, remember that, or yeah, that was fun, but you won't get a visceral reaction like the piano jump scare gave me a heart attack or running from a boulder was just so stressful. And in this video I'm going to try and find out why Croc is relegated to the minds of old people like me, while characters like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro are still talked about to this day. First up, let's have a little talk about the development of Croc. The developers of Croc, Argonaut Software, were collaborating with Nintendo after Argonaut had figured out a way to bypass the Game Boy's copy protection. This collaboration would eventually lead to the Super FX chip, most famously used in Argonaut Software's widely loved release, Star Fox. Shortly after releasing Star Fox, Argonaut started working on a concept for a platform game set in the third dimension. This game would have starred Yoshi, Mario's much-loved green reptile companion. Nintendo were initially enthusiastic to move forward with the concept, but eventually dropped it in favour of a similar game they were working on. That game turned out to be Super Mario 64, and I don't think I need to tell you how much of an impact that had on gaming. Around the same time, Nintendo also cancelled Star Fox 2 while it was near completion, and this caused the end of the relationship between Argonaut and Nintendo. Following the end of the partnership, Argonaut shopped the 3D platformer concept around, eventually settling on Fox Interactive as the company to publish the game, as Argonaut were already working on Alien Resurrection for Fox. Croc's character design came from Simon Keaton, who was requested to create a character who looked marginally similar to Yoshi. The Gobbos were designed to give Croc something to save that wasn't a princess. Basically, Croc as it was designed and released post-Nintendo has the same energy of the kid who takes his ball home after being in a street football game, and I love it. So now that we're all on the same page about where Croc came from, let's talk about what Croc is. It's a 3D platformer with things to collect and levels to complete. I know, revolutionary. It may seem reductive to boil Croc down to these simple elements, but that's exactly what Croc is. It's also what a lot of 3D platformers at the time were, and largely still are to this day. Banjo-Kazooie is about collecting jiggies and finishing levels. Mario has the formula refined to arguable perfection. The differences in these games are where they begin to shine. Crash Bandicoot is more focused on beating the levels with a relatively high skill ceiling if you want to get all of its collectibles. Spyro went for a more open route with a bonus if you went out of your way to do everything. Croc goes for somewhere between those two. In the main levels there are 6 Gobbos to find. 5 of those Gobbos are found in the main part of the level, with the 6th being locked behind a gem door. To open the gem door you need to find the 5 coloured gems. In the last room there'll be a platforming challenge or some kind of minigame to get the final Gobbo, and then you can ring the gong and leave. The levels are broken down into 5 worlds, with the first 4 having 6 normal levels, 2 boss levels, and 2 bonus levels. To unlock a bonus level, you need to get all of the Gobbos from the 3 levels preceding a boss. Bonus levels don't have Gobbos or gems to find, instead having jigsaw pieces. Croc released before Banjo-Kazooie, come on Rare, stop copying. Collecting the 8 jigsaw pieces from the 4 worlds and beating the final boss unlocks the final world. The final world has 5 levels, the first 4 being based on each of the 4 worlds, and then a final boss level. All told, there are 45 levels in Croc, and I played them all in order to make this video. And I can say that at least half the time, I was actually having fun. The other half of the time I was raging as the little snaggle-toothed lizard boy refused to grab onto ledges, wouldn't jump quite far enough, and also at my own incompetence in the game's various mini-games. Alright, let's talk a bit about the actual gameplay. Croc can run, jump, tail whip, and stomp. Other than some really ropey underwater sections, that's about all you'll be doing to interact with Croc's game world. Releasing a few short months after the dual analog controller, Croc does have analog controls. No, I wouldn't recommend them. The game was clearly designed to be played with the tank-style controls that it launched with, because yes, this is a platformer with tank controls. Left and right on the D-pad, while standing still, just turns Croc left or right. It's an uncomfortable control scheme overall, and honestly it did cause my hand to cramp up a bit by the end of my playthrough, but it was still preferred over the analog controls where the only way to turn Croc on the spot is to use a tiny minuscule movement of the analog stick. And in a lot of Croc's platforming you definitely want the precision offered from the D-pad. Croc's also from the golden age of video games where you're expected to have read the manual before playing the game. I have many fond memories from my days as young Chaz, sitting in the car on the way home excitedly reading out features and story tidbits from the manuals as my mum pretended to be interested. Good times. Croc very much expects you to read the manual. Its entire story is in there. In-game you get a little cutscene to set things up with Baron Dante and his Dantinis kidnapping the Gobbos, but if you want the real deep Croc lore then you have to bust open the manual and read the 3 whole pages of it. Then there's some weird stuff in there. Wind-powered car moisteners. annual midget crocodile basket racing, and the wonderful reveal that Croc is known to some of the Gobbos as Choo Choo McBoogie. But stashed away in that manual is this little picture of what they say is a climbable wall. I hadn't played Croc for around 25 years before replaying it for this video. Dear God, Croc is 25 years old. I need to lie down. And I'd completely forgotten that climbable walls were a thing. So when I was greeted with this just a few levels in, I assumed it was part of the texture for the wall and proceeded to get stuck for a bit. It's not helped that if you're not trying to grab onto the wall from pretty much straight on, it just doesn't work, which led to me further believing it was nothing. All of the platform in the levels, honestly, for the most part, feels super solid. Once you get used to the cadence of jump, turn, jump, move, jump, I'd even say that most of the platforming is fun. Sure, there are some jumps that feel super precise, mostly in the game's second world, the Ice Island. This is more down to the ice physics, another platforming staple. All ice levels must have points where you slip sliding away on the ice. Personally, I despise the vast majority of these mechanics. The joy in a platformer for me is in learning and mastering the controls. So when one of the challenges is to take away the familiarity with the controls that you've learned over the last few hours, it tends to leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. Thankfully, there aren't a lot of these sections in Croc. It is worth noting that while Croc is ostensibly a child's game, it actually demands a fairly high amount of precision in its platforming, though not always from its level design. Argonaut made the bold decision to not have invulnerability frames when Croc takes damage. If you're not familiar with the concept, invulnerability frames are brief periods of time after taking damage where you can no longer be hurt. They're very helpful to stop a player from just dying the instant they take any damage. They'd have been helpful in this game where Croc can take at most 2 back-to-back hits before dying. Throughout each level are normal gems. Normal gems get added to Croc's count when you pick them up. When you take a hit, you drop all your gems. Get hit without any gems and it's death. This system works fine when you're fighting enemies, but completely falls apart with environmental hazards. Touching lava or any other surface that hurts Croc fires Croc up in the air, but as soon as you land again, you take damage and die. Usually you'll be too far from any safe ground to land on, so any of these falls is basically a foregone conclusion of death. There's also some edge cases where your first bounce will get you stuck under a platform, so you can't actually bounce back up on top of the platform and you just die straight away as well. So while we're talking about deaths, let's talk about how general level progression works and why game overs and some of the minigames can be unnecessarily punishing. In order to get all 6 Gobbos, you have to get them all in one run. You can't finish a level with 5 of them and then go back in to get the specific one that you missed. You need all 6 or it doesn't count. Again, this works fine a lot of the time, but when it comes to game overs, you get booted out to the start of the level, losing all progress. This is fairly standard for platformers, so I can't be too mad about it. But the minigames. Oh god, the minigames. Minigames, barring one level, will always be in the gem door section of a level. So in order to get to them, you've had to get everything in the level previous to the door. And then you get to play a minigame. And if you fail the minigame, you can't reset it to try again. I think you can die to reset the attempt, but Croc is so stingy with its lives, most of the time when I came up against a minigame, I was on 0 lives from getting through the level, and a death would have just been a game over anyway. So if you fail a minigame, it's back to the start of the level to collect everything again and have another shot. There are 2 particularly egregious examples of this being a terrible design decision, and they both involve time precision jumping. In fact, they're largely the same minigame but with different set dressing. 3 stumps, 3 buttons with arrows pointing to the stumps, sheep pop out the stumps, press arrow to pop sheep. Seems simple enough, but the sequence is 32 moves long and you need to score 25 or higher to get the Gobbo. Anything less than that and they'll give you a life or 2, but you'll need to restart the level. The second minigame took me roughly 40 minutes if you include the time spent to replay the level to get an attempt at it. 2 buttons, left and right. The cauldron ahead and gems that spawn above the cauldron and fall. Hit the buttons to make the cauldron move in the direction marked. Again, this sequence is 32 moves long, and you have to get them all. And you have so little time to actually get this right. The gem has to fall directly into the cauldron. If it hits the sides, you've failed and you have to restart the level to try again. If you send the cauldron the wrong way or react even a second too slowly, you'll probably fail and have to rerun the level. I know that a minute and a half might not seem that long in the grand scheme of things, but considering the level of concentration it needs, it feels super punishing to have to replay the entire level if you make a mistake. There's also a minigame where you're racing ghosts, which feels incredibly oppressive in its difficulty until you figure out the ghost only speeds up when it hasn't collected a gem for a while, in order to give it a rubber banding AI feel, much like Mario Kart. I think my last comment to really make on the general gameplay is that the design has a tendency to feel a bit inconsistent. The vast majority of the time you'll find the coloured gems in the boxes that you stomp. Brilliant. Except sometimes they'll just be disguised as normal gems, so you have to make sure that you collect all of those in every level just so you don't accidentally miss a coloured gem. At first, any locked doors will be for secret areas usually hiding a gobbo or a gem, but about halfway through the game the locked doors will actually become the correct path. And this leads to possibly the worst thing about Croc for me. Sometimes you'll accidentally lock yourself out of a gobbo or gem simply by taking one path before another. The best example of this to me is in one of the later levels, where you have the option of taking 3 different paths right at the end of a level. There is a gobbo behind one of those paths, but all 3 of them will just lock you in as soon as you go through the door. So if you pick the wrong door, all that you can do is ring the gong and go through the entire level again. There's a few more examples of the game doing this, but this is definitely the one that just feels the most unnecessarily punishing because of how far it is in the game and how late it is in that particular level. Now onto the real failure of design for Croc, the bosses. I'm just going to show you some clips of the different bosses and let's see if you can spot the problem. Pretty much every boss in this game is just a slight variation on run in a circle and tail whip or stomp on the boss when it stops moving. The Baron Dante fight in World 4 throws jumping in to dodge an attack before you can hit him into the mix, but amazingly the boss fight that actually feels more than trivial is the underwater boss, which still comes down to move in a circle until the boss stops, then hit it, but because you're dealing with the underwater controls, it feels like a challenge. And just for a giggle, here's the uninterrupted, unedited final boss of World 5, Crystal Dante. Yeah, they really didn't know what to do with the boss fights. I think they may be the worst boss fights in a platformer that I've ever experienced, and I've already covered Spyro 1 on the channel. Finally, let's talk about aesthetics. The game looks great. It has a very simple art style that serves the game very well. From the lush greens of the forest island to the sandy deserts of, well, the desert island, each world has a very distinct theme that really gives the game a delightful bit of charm. Each world uses different instrumentation in its music, like the Ice Island using carol bells, or the Desert Island using horns to give each world a really unique sound and look. The character models also just ooze charm. Croc is adorable. His Snaggletooth is a great addition. Each boss gets a cutscene of Baron Dante turning them from a harmless animal into a boss equivalent. It's got this wonderful Saturday morning cartoon vibe to the whole thing, and I really like what they've done with the game aesthetically. Unfortunately, I think I see why people don't really remember Croc when talking about the big platformers of the time. The good is, it's just good. There's some real nice platforming to be had here, but it's not anything standout. There's no big set pieces, and the level design can be satisfying, but that's not really what you talk about when you're reminiscing about old games, is it? It's not excessively bad, so you're not going to bring it up to just laugh at it. Croc's biggest crime is that it's a good game that came out around the same time that great games were coming out. Don't get me wrong, Croc sold well enough to warrant a sequel in the PS1 and 2 Game Boy spin-offs, but when you compare its longevity to the other franchises that kicked off in that early 3D era like Resident Evil, Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, Spyro, they all had much longer lifespans, and I think it shows that even in the mid-90s being good enough wasn't good enough. If you've made it to the end, then thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for more of my weird takes on games. I've been your Uncle Chaz, and I'll see you in the next one.